Shall I talk as I do it?
Yeah.
Okay, so we've just pulled off the highway here, and we're on a road, and there are big signs everywhere saying Air Force Base, no unauthorised access, personnel only. There are cameras and everywhere that I can see, and it looks like this is as far as we can go. So we've just pulled off to the side of the road by a big sign that says Edwards Air Force Base.
When I embarked on this case, I expected my time would be spent in Japan, talking to people there, inching closer to finding out why the Miyazawa family were murdered and who was behind it.
Here we go. Right, so let's not spend too much time here because we're not meant to be here technically.
I didn't have any expectation that the research would lead me to my own front door, to California, to within just an hour of where I live. That's just wild. And yet, here we are, in the desert, doing something I'm worried might get me into trouble.
If they do stop us, what shall I say? We're just making a podcast about sand.
From USG Audio and What's the Story Sounds, I'm Nick Obregon, and this is Faceless, Episode 5. In the last episode, I told you that the killer's hip bag had contained a surprising clue, some sand. The Tokyo police mentions this only once, hidden away online in an information appeal. No details are given, beyond the word sand, and the news outlets don't go into too much detail either. Nor do they say how much sand, but they do say that the sand had been tested and was found to originate in California. And this kind of blows my mind. I didn't know that sand could be traced back to a specific place for starters. And, if it can, how has sand from California found its way to our crime scene in the first place? That's more than 5,500 miles away. It just doesn't make sense. But before I get into the details, I had to understand just how unique sand can be. And is it even possible to say for sure where sand comes from?
There are multiple types of soils across this world. Each country in the world has a different history of sand formation. Each country in the world has a different underlying mix of geologies.
Lorna Dawson is a world-renowned sand and soil expert.
They can vary by the size of the grains. The sand can be coarse, medium, or fine textured, a whole range of different particle sizes within that sand sample.
So, beach sand in Florida will be different from desert sand in the Sahara.
It also varies in the coatings that form on those grains. As a sand develops from the very raw new sand that's formed at the coast.
Lorna is a forensic soil scientist, applying her understanding of the unique elements in soils and sands to inform the justice system. I figured this was a newfangled technique, but she told me it's something which has been going on for longer than you might think.
The earliest recorded use of this whole principle of forensic soil science was actually carried out by the Romans when they looked at the material on the hooves of the enemy's horses. And from looking at that material, they worked out which region that the enemy was coming from.
The science has moved on since Roman times, of course, but the principles are the same. As we spoke, I found my mind racing. I knew forensic techniques could do amazing things, but Lorna was surprising me with just how much is possible.
For example, in a teaspoonful of sand, you get more organisms than people on the planet. So that tells you the sheer scale of information that we could get if we wanted to. And we've got the technology now to do a full DNA analysis on a particular sample.
Lorna walked me through how expert scientists in Japan would have been given the hip bag and asked to work out whereabouts in Japan the sand inside had come from. When they discovered the sand didn't match with Japanese samples, they would have then looked overseas.
Interpol would then connect them internationally to other forensic scientists, forensic geoscientists who would have a knowledge of sands within their own countries and a global database, and compare it with that database and see which country actually contains sands that shared the characteristics of that question sample from the crime scene in Japan.
According to the reports, the scientists had matched the sand to Western USA, to California. But would it be possible to narrow it down even more?
There's a database of sands in California, actually. So you can compare it with actual database values of sand. So you'd be able to say probably which area, not just has it come from California or not, does it share the characteristics of California, but you'd be able to narrow down which zone in California it likely came from.
From what Lorna was telling me, the sand in the hit bag could have guided police to a region, even a town, where the killer had apparently once been. But how had sand from California travelled across the world and made its way to the crime scene? Did the killer live right here on the West Coast? Maybe he was visiting on vacation. Was he in Japan on vacation? Truth be told, I spent more time than is healthy thinking about that hit bag and talking about it with Ryushi. I don't get this, Ryushi. I don't understand. So, I mean, Lorna's saying that sand can guide cops to not just a region, but like a specific place within that region, right? So what I don't understand is how this bag can come from Japan. And because it does come from Japan, right? We know that.
It's manufactured in Osaka, I believe. They made 2,850 of them between 1995 and 1999.
So someone had to bring it from Japan to America, but then bring it back to Japan again. And that's the bit I'm struggling with, right?
I mean, it doesn't make sense to me. I mean, could it be a second-hand bag?
If the bag was manufactured in Osaka and then it went to America because someone moved to America and they bought it second-hand there, fair enough. But it comes back. So that makes me think it's not second-hand. It's with someone because they own it. That makes sense, right?
I wonder if the police checked the records of people who've been to America and back.
Right, and I mean, I've thought about that too, and you think they have to have looked. I mean, they have to have considered the possibility that if there's sand from another country, then maybe we should look at that country, right? Like, that's not, you don't need Colombo to work that out. I was interested to see how much Takeshi Tsuchita, the former police chief who led the Miyazawa murder investigation, would tell me about the sand.
There was some sand found in the hip bag. This was investigated and found to be similar to sand found in the Miura Peninsula and also in America.
That's all the chief was prepared to admit. America. But the single report I found online went further. It says the sand comes from a specific part of the US, north of Los Angeles, in the middle of the desert, an area around Edwards. The nearest city is California City. Now, I hadn't heard of it either, but looking at a map, it's a town out in the desert, about 100 miles north of LA. So, what was the link between the Miyazawa murders and a tiny town in California? I just couldn't make sense of it. Was it really possible that the faceless man had spent time hanging out in the Mojave Desert, then flown out of LAX just in time for the new year, and slaughtered a whole family in Setagaya? Possible, yes, but likely? Still, Lorna was saying it. The chief was saying it. The very bag the killer had brought to the Miyazawa's house was saying it. This link was real. The culprit had to have been here, in California, before he became the faceless man. That night, I didn't sleep well. I kept wondering if the answer to these murders was just an hour or two's drive away.
All right, it's 5 a.m, sometime after 5. And obviously I can't sleep. I got out of bed, jumped on my laptop, and I've just booked a room in a hotel out in the desert, California City to be specific. And as I was entering my card details, I hear this low grumble of a car engine outside. Now, I live close to the corner of a main road, so that's normal enough, but I don't know, it idled for quite a long time. I guess long enough for me to wonder. So I ended up kind of slowly parting the kitchen blinds, leaving the light off to keep the darkness, to be able to peer out at the car. And it's an old house, and it creaks in the wind, and the pipes tinkle. So I sort of listened to this house of mine in the dark kitchen, and I watched that car, and I kind of had this same stupid thought, which is, what if it's him? And I know it's not possible, but what if somehow he's found out about this podcast?
I was being paranoid, I know, but maybe I had good reason to be.
Now, I did a quick Google search before recording this, and I found an article in the Mojave Desert News. The headline reads, 8 unsolved California City cases featured on Dateline.
That's when I realised. It was an obvious question to ask. If the faceless man did have links to the area, maybe he'd killed here too. Here was a bunch of unsolved murders in a small town in the US, which has evidential links to an unsolved murder in Tokyo. It was almost too much of a coincidence. I had to go and see California City for myself.
Okay, we're now approaching California City Boulevard, which is the main strip of this town of 14,000 people. I am looking at little houses, little single-story houses, some kids playing basketball in their front lawn, and then just like chaparral, bushes, sort of scrub. In the distance, there are mountains, and this kind of looks like somebody just plonked a town in the middle of nowhere. There are little strip malls with like real estate places and notaries and so on, liquor stores. I can't see many people on the road. I mean, everyone's in cars. I can't see any pedestrians walking up and down.
There's one hotel, a golf course, and a prison. And that's kind of it.
There's a children's self-defense academy, which is only open 2 days a week. Basically, anywhere you are in California City, you can see the end of it. Like that's the predominant feeling, is that you're in a place, but you can see outside of it anywhere you look.
The city planners had big dreams for California City. The land size here makes it the 3rd largest city in the state. But the reality is very different. Just 14,000 people live here. And you're no sooner on the main street than you've driven through the city, and you're on the way out the other side.
I mean, the question that sort of jumps out at you as you drive through California City, without kind of, talking down to California City, is you wouldn't go out of your way to come here. This is not a place you're coming to for a weekend away with your girlfriend or whatever it might be. This is a place where people live and people pass through.
I hadn't learned much, but it confirmed that California City is not a tourist destination.
If the evidence does tell us that this man, at some point before December 2000, was walking around here to the point where he was getting sand in his bum bag, in his fanny pack, well, what was he doing here? And as I drive through it, it's a very difficult question to even theorize an answer for.
There was something else which grabbed my attention. Billboards about recent crimes, an abduction, a murder. The billboards were calling on the local police to do more. And it got me thinking. If a clue found at the scene of the Miyazawa murders linked back to California City, then the Tokyo police had no doubt been in touch with the police here. They would have wanted to know about any on-the-run killers, suspects, or similar crimes. Anyone with links to California City and Japan. I knew the Japanese police wouldn't tell me, but the cops in California, well, they might.
Push button. Good morning. Morning.
Hello.
How are you doing? Thank you. My name is Nick, by the way. Nick.
I'm Larry.
Lovely to meet you, Larry.
The California City Police Station is in keeping with the rest of the town. You would drive past and not notice it. That's literally what we did. Inside it was quiet, and I think there was a bit of suspicion around why I was there. But investigator Larry Brandenburg was intrigued enough to make time for a chat.
So, essentially, the podcast that we're making is about an unsolved...
I told Larry about the
in
case
Japan.
and about the sand, and it was all news to
One
him.
of the clues that this guy leaves behind in the house, because he murders an entire family, is sand from this region. And that's the only real connection to California City. So we've basically come here. If you guys have ever heard about this family murder in Tokyo 20 years ago.
I have not.
No, it's first time.
First time you've heard of it, yeah?
So, as far as we know, and they know, at no time had the police in Japan reached out and spoken to the cops in California City. And I find that hard to believe. And so did Larry. Within a few minutes, me and my producers were invited in to meet the chief. And he couldn't believe it either.
Is from Edwards.
No.
Yeah.
Wow.
I don't know how they could.
Give it to Larry, he'll figure it out.
But
I'm serious. He's the best in the business.
I don't know.
That's why I got him. No, seriously. He's the best.
But you'd never heard of it either.
No.
But if there's a clue that links to here,
That's amazing.
They would have probably spoken to the people
You
here
would
at the
think.
time.
We talked for more than an hour. Larry quizzing me more about the sand than I was able to quiz him about California City.
Well, the sand really jumps out at me because I didn't know they could nail sand down like that, like DNA, for instance. That's definite science. We know that that's true. If I get your DNA and match it, you're done.
Right,
you
right,
know, but
right.
I didn't know they do that with sand. I'd like to know how.
We discussed the unsolved murders which had given California City a bad name and a slot on Dateline. But the cops told us they had suspects for most of those, and there weren't any links to Tokyo. And Larry told me the force would happily cooperate if colleagues in Tokyo had any questions.
They'd get whatever they needed from us. I mean, we'd cooperate with them fully. Oh yeah, we wouldn't have a problem with that.
And I mean, it's strange to me that there would be, like, if we can work out, oh, this sand is from California City, let's go and have a look. It just blows my mind that maybe they never sent guys out here to even ask.
Yeah, I mean, none of us has been around here that long to know, but I mean, you could check with the military over there.
So we're sure the faceless man isn't a known fugitive on the run from California City. And I knew that would be the case. But before I left, I wanted to know if there was any reason why someone from Japan might visit the town.
I mean, if I had to come up with like a guess, the Air Force Base is right here.
Right.
So if it was an airman.
My visit to the police station was enlightening and also frustrating.
If they've never heard of it, then there's a possibility the Japanese have never come here. Which then begs the question, why not?
It's one of the only solid clues in the case. Sand from right here has made its way to the crime scene in Tokyo, and yet nobody had spoken to the police here about it. There had to be a good reason for that, right? I'd never doubted the hard work of the TMPD. Though they hadn't spoken to me directly, I fully believed that they tracked down every single lead they had. But in the last episode, Masafumi Kajitani had described the detectives being tired, and now I was wondering, what else had I assumed the police had done, which maybe they hadn't? When I spoke to journalist Julian Ryle, he echoed these concerns.
I'm actually quite shocked to hear that they hadn't even spoken to the local police. Maybe they were relying on, a proxy to do that for them, local police to do, or an agent in the US. In Japan, there's almost this reluctance. Someone in Tokyo Metropolitan Police headquarters fears their English isn't good enough. They don't want to lose face, so getting on the phone to the local police in California, there would be embarrassment if their language wasn't very good. Rather than sort of going with what should be done, they are sort of hamstrung by what they feel they can't do.
Driving away from the police station, I made my way to the end of town. By this point, I just wanted to find something to eat. Just to the west is the rather impressively titled California City Airport. In truth, it's an airstrip with a cafe attached, half a dozen tables in an otherwise empty terminal, where you can enjoy a view of the runway while you tuck into a hamburger. I sat with my producers, ordered some food, and got chatting to the waitress. Like in any small town, we were attracting some attention. Unfamiliar faces in a place where everyone knows everyone. And she wanted to know what brought us to California City and why there are a bunch of microphones and batteries on the table.
We're making a podcast about a crime that happened in Japan 20 years ago. Long story short, the guy who did it left behind sand grains from California City.
Oh, wow.
So, which is like, you ever heard of Tokyo police, Japanese police coming here to make inquiries, talking to the local cops or anything like that?
And you said 20 years ago?
20 years ago.
So I'm 39.
Okay.
That would have happened when I was like 19 and 20, and I don't remember hearing anything about that.
Right.
And I've been here since I was like 2.
Right. So you
I
would
was
have.
basically born and raised here. That's crazy shit.
Yeah, because I mean, you'd think like that would be something people would have heard of, right?
Yeah,
if it happened.
For sure.
Like if police from Japan came here and asked questions.
We would see the vehicles and stuff.
Right.
And this town is really nosy, so as soon as shit like that happens,
Word goes around.
Yeah.
Good to know. Thank you.
A few minutes later, the waitress returned with our food and an update.
So I just texted my friend that used to work at the PD a long time ago, and she said that nothing ever happened like that. No Japan police came out here, no nothing.
And she would have been there in 2000-ish?
Yeah.
Wow.
And it's not possible that maybe, I don't know, like the Japanese police spoke to just the chief, and the chief would have dealt with it and kept it
She's
all
married
quiet.
to the chief.
All right.
She's married to the chief.
She'd have heard it.
Yeah, she would have known.
Weird.
Before long, we'd established that nobody in this town had heard of the murders in Setagaya or any kind of link to them. No Japanese cops had ever asked questions or visited. It may have been 20 years ago, but pretty much everyone I met was born and raised in California City, and none of them remembered anything about this case. But both the police and the cafe owner had told me the same thing. It'll be something to do with the airbase. Take a look at Edwards Air Base. I'd seen some signs on my drive into California City and a turnoff for Edwards. But as you drive on the freeway, you can't see any signs of a big military base. Looking online, Edwards Air Base is one of the biggest military bases in the entire country. According to Wikipedia, the site covers some 470 square miles and is home to thousands of people from the US Air Force, US Navy, and even some foreign air forces. It's even an operational base for NASA. And that's to say nothing of the contractors or civilian personnel working there. The gas station, the Panda Express, the post office. But as you drive along the 58 freeway, you would never know it was there. And the edge of the base is just a few miles outside of California City. So, maybe the sand had come from there. Could the sand in the Miyazawa's home actually be from Edwards Air Base? Could the faceless man actually be US Air Force? Theory number 5. The military guy. The killer is a member of the US military, posted in Edwards Air Base, and gets sand from the base in his hip bag. On deployment to Japan, he commits the murders and then leaves his bag at the scene. Before I came to California City, I packed a handful of small Ziploc bags. I thought about collecting some sand of my own from the desert, but now I had an idea. I wondered if sand in California City was different to the sand at Edwards Air Base. Were they essentially the same compounds? Or were they as different, scientifically speaking, as chalk and cheese? I guess they were all the same. After all, the base is only a few miles outside of California City. But what if I was wrong? If the sand was distinct, well then, the police in Tokyo would be able to know exactly where the sand at the crime scene had come from. To put it simply, if that sand was different, the Tokyo cops would be able to know whether or not the faceless man was a civilian or a military guy. We had to run that experiment.
How far into the desert do you go?
Yeah, I mean, X marks the spot, doesn't it? Shall I get it from maybe like by the fence? It looks like there's a big inviting sand pile there. Okay.
I chose a spot just slightly off the main road, a place where someone might set their bag down if they were walking, somewhere not too far off the beaten track. I was trying to replicate how someone might get grains of sand in their hip bag.
How much do you reckon she needs? She probably doesn't need that twig. You would imagine that if the killer has sand in his fanny pack, it can't be a great deal, like it has to be like small amounts, which he's probably got by accident, by being out in the desert. Which makes you think, I don't know, what was he out here doing? How do you get sand in your fanny pack? Maybe he puts it down or something. In any case. I'll put 1 just so I can remember the order we did it in.
Yeah, that birdie thing.
What? Right, there we go.
That was the easy bit. Desert surrounds all of California City. It was hard to try and imagine walking in the footsteps of the faceless man. What had he been doing out here? The whole thing was surreal. I'm used to sitting at my desk, drinking my coffee, and coming up with crime stories. Now it felt like I was, in a small way, part of one. But the sand sample I got was a genuine handful of sand from inside the city. Now I needed to get one from Edwards Air Base, and that might prove more difficult.
Okay, so we've just pulled off the highway here, and we're on a road and there are big signs everywhere saying Air Force Base, no unauthorised access, personnel only. There are cameras and everywhere that I can see, and it looks like this is as far as we can go. So we've just pulled off to the side of the road by a big sign that says Edwards Air Force Base.
Admittedly, the base stretches out much further into the desert, and it would be impossible to sample all of it. But this was the closest part of the base to the city. If the sand was significantly different here, then the rest of the base would likely be even more distinct.
I'm pretty sure, like you guys can't see it from here, but where we turned off, there's like a little thing that comes out the ground. I'm pretty sure that's their cameras from there. I can see a massive plane over there though. So we're not going to spend too much time here because I'm not sure if we're allowed to be here, and I don't want to get arrested by the US Air Force for stealing their sand.
How does it look?
So the sand itself, it seems a bit finer here than it was in California City. It still has the little rocks and twigs the other sand had, but it looks more like the sand that you see on the beach. It's dark and it's finer. You can even sort of hear it in the bag that it's kind of different. Let me see if I can get some. It's about more or less the same amount. Yeah, it looks a lot more like sandy. So I'm going to keep it separate from the other bag so that they can't cross-contaminate. Okay.
Good. Exciting.
Yeah.
What does it feel like doing this?
Coming out here?
Yeah.
It's a mix of feeling, vaguely excited, like it feels like maybe we're walking in his footsteps, even if 20 years on. At the same time, you can't get away from the fact that it feels a bit like a wild goose chase, and it's just so big and so empty that it's hard to imagine that a guy could be here 20 years ago and then go on to murder an entire family. In suburban Tokyo, it's just... if you say to me the Air Force is not the link, then it's hard to imagine this happening at all.
As we left the base and headed back towards LA, I admit to taking a few glances over my shoulder. Would someone from the base come and follow me? Ask what I was doing, skulking around in the desert. It's well known that the American authorities don't always see the funny side in what could be seen as suspicious behaviour. Especially not from a guy with a funny accent and a bunch of cables sticking out of his pockets. Plus, now I had 2 Ziploc bags with sand, labelled and stored separately in the trunk. It felt like I might have a hard time convincing them this was all for a podcast. Fortunately, nobody did follow us. And I spent the drive back thinking more and more about the military link, the city, and how sand from somewhere here had made it to Tokyo. The next morning, I had 2 jobs. Number 1, find out everything I could about Edwards, and number 2, send the sand samples to Lorna.
So I have a kind of a weird question. What would I do if I'm making a podcast and I need to ship some sand from the desert to Scotland? How would I do that? Does that just need to be like in a Ziploc bag, or so I can just put that secure it and send it? Okay, great. Thanks so much.
With the sand now on a 5,000-mile journey to Scotland, I set about looking for any connection between Edwards Air Force Base and Tokyo. With the world's biggest air force, the US has bases positioned strategically around the world, and they share resources with other allied countries. At Edwards, they allow British military to train their pilots. There's a squadron from the Netherlands based here. The number of people on base or visiting each year is huge. So huge, in fact, that when I asked the American military for an exact number, they couldn't tell me. The US also operates a number of Air Force bases around the world. American servicemen and women are frequently stationed abroad. These guys come and go all the time, and this includes Japan. In fact, since 1957, there has been a United States Forces Japan, or USFJ, providing defense support, air control, and disaster response. And the headquarters for this US-Japanese military operation is an airbase called Yokota, situated in the west of Tokyo, the same side of the city as Setagaya, and only 18 miles away from the Miyazawa's house. And I learned that military personnel are posted in both Edwards and Yokota. So, a direct link between California and Tokyo exists after all. Remember earlier in the episode when I spoke to the chief? He admitted that the sand in the bag could have come from America. But he said something else too.
There was some sand found in the hip bag. This was investigated and found to be similar to sand found in the Miura Peninsula and also in America.
The Miura Peninsula. There was also sand from the Miura Peninsula. It's to the south of Tokyo. Wikipedia calls it a bedroom community for those working in the capital. It's also popular with tourists. Something else you'll find in the Miura Peninsula are 2 military bases, including one run by the US Air Force. Everything seemed to be pointing the same way. a member of the military buys the hit bag while they're posted in Japan. Maybe they bring it back to the US. Some of that sand gets in when they're packing and unpacking. They take it back with them to Japan and wear it to commit the murders. Or maybe they buy the bag in Japan. It never comes to the US, but it's packed and unpacked with clothes and things that carry sand into the bag. I couldn't see any other way that sand could get into the bag, and the bag got into the crime scene. Either way, the sand seemed to tell us the faceless man was connected to the military in some way or another. But the whole time I'm exploring this theory, I'm worried it's flawed. Because we know that the killer left his fingerprints all over the scene. And the US military would have the fingerprints of every serviceman and woman on file. But when I asked the US Air Force, they refused to confirm if the Japanese police had run a check against their list. And the Tokyo police refused to comment too. So, could it be that the killer was there all along and nobody has just ever bothered to check? It was a couple of weeks later that Lorna emailed and asked for a call. Her tests on my 2 samples were complete, and she wanted to share the results.
They were perfectly packaged, the bags were sealed, and we were faced with the question, now, are these sands the same or are they different? So we'd follow our normal forensic procedure, and that is to first look at them with the naked eye, with a hand lens, with good lighting in the forensic laboratory. Straight away, we could see that they had a different particle size distribution. So physically, they looked different. Sand 1 was much more homogeneous. Sand 2 was much more complex and not well sorted. So we could physically see they were different. They're different colour. They were so different that if I'd given it to one of my children, they would have been able to say they're different. You wouldn't need a degree in soil science to do that. They were so different.
So, the 2 samples are recognisably different. Even if cops at the time hadn't drilled down into it, science and the difference in sand would mean that now the police could narrow down their search. They could know for sure if the sand comes from California City or Edwards Air Base or somewhere else altogether. And I think that's the most important breakthrough so far.
I think it's very important in this particular investigation. If they can exclude it for some other reason that we don't know, then that's okay. But if it cannot be excluded, then I think that sand could hold some secrets that could reveal where it came from and where the person had actually been.
With everything I discovered, it was time to go back to Chief Tsuchita, and I was excited to hear his thoughts on California City, Edwards, all of it.
I have to say, I wondered at the time and still wonder if this hip bag always belonged to the killer. Was it something that he received or picked up? Therefore, I think the idea that the sand means the killer spent time in America is questionable.
Now, I've got a lot of respect for the chief. This case means more to him than anything else. And he's spoken at length with me several times during the making of this podcast. But this answer about the sand, it just doesn't sit well with me. Because it feels so inconsistent with everything else. There are clues that feel flimsy. The shoes, for example, which are Korean, but perhaps bought and shipped by a mail order. I don't think they're a smoking gun, but the police prioritise them. The skater link, it's based on a hunch and some baggy clothes, but it got the full attention of the cops. But the sand, which is unequivocally and inarguably American, well, the Tokyo police just aren't buying the potential relevance.
The sand has been investigated thoroughly because it is the best evidence we have of the killer's movements. The California, the Los Angeles area was very thoroughly investigated in depth However, the source of the sand was never identified.
But I don't know how thorough the police have been. Chief Tsuchita admitted that nobody from his team had gone to California, at least to his knowledge, and they hadn't managed to match the sand to a specific place.
As far as I know, nobody went to California in person. Maybe they did.
He reiterated that the bag might not have belonged to the killer.
There's a big question mark for me over whether he was the only owner of the bag. Of course, if he was, then that would help identify his movements. But if he's not the only owner, if he's not the only person who've ever owned it, then that doesn't help us very much.
And sure, I agree. But then, wouldn't it be possible to find other DNA profiles on the bag? If someone else had been using it for the last 5 years and then the killer picked it up, wouldn't the original owner's DNA still be on the bag?
Did they do DNA testing on the bag, and did they find other profiles? Did DNA suggest that they may well have been other owners of the bag?
No, there's no other profiles.
So then if the killer's DNA is on the bag, and if there is sand from Edwards in the bag, then the possibility does exist that the killer was able to go to Edwards and then go to the Miyazawa's home.
The likelihood is yes. It must be so.
I could not believe it. The chief was admitting that the bag only had one source of DNA on it, which makes it all the more likely that it is a bag belonging to the killer. And that means that the sand, and exactly where it came from, is a bigger clue than ever. Lorna too. She agreed that the sand is highly likely to be significant.
Anything that's been left behind at a crime scene that has not come from that particular home location, and in this case, has not come from that country, has to be of tremendous significance.
And if the sand hasn't been tested to prove exactly where it came from, well, Lorna said it's not too late, and she offered her services.
No matter the size of sample, no matter the time it was taken, we can work on cold cases, and in fact have successfully analysed soil and sand that's been kept in police offices for 50 years. Sand holds that information. The new techniques that have been developed can tell us the answer to the question, where did the sand come from?
Next time, I leave the military theory because something new grabs my attention. A brand new piece of evidence which shines a whole new light on everything I thought I knew about this case. This podcast was written and hosted by me, Nick Obregon. My producers for What's the Story Sounds are Darrell Brown and Sophie Ellis. In Japan, my producer is Ryushi Lindsay. Sound design by Tom Brewins. Our music is composed by James Warburton and KPM Music. Our USG audio team includes Josh Bloch and Jennifer Sears. This is a USG audio podcast in collaboration with What's the Story Sounds. If you have any information or leads on this case, please email faceless@whatsthestorysounds.com or reach out to us on Twitter. And if you've enjoyed this series, please leave us a rating and review wherever you get your podcasts. And check out more USG audio podcasts at usgaudio.com.